Hi there, everybody. Hi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're 6 seconds into the thing. Hi there. I'm sorry I'm a little late. I'm a minute or two, couple minutes late today. But we had, I was goofing off trying to I came to the office late. I stayed in bed. This is a Friday. I normally do work on Friday, do some recordings, but I woke up this morning feeling like crap, real crap. It was like, hence I'm wearing the sweatshirt, not my short shirt, because I don't want to get. I was kind of like chilly and don't want to get chilly. It's actually warm in here, so it's like don't necessarily need it, but at the same time I wearing the sweatshirt because hell, I feel like this is one of those it's 5 o'clock here, p.m., but at America, it's about 11, East Coast 11 or earlier, so it's Friday mornings. Hey there, hi there, everyone. So for you guys, it's morning. For me in Central Europe, Poland, it's afternoon. And it's a new month. It is the beginning of a month, so therefore the monthly Friday live stream, but on a month, the monthly, yay. What to do, people saying what to do. We'll see. Probably no one's coming. I kind of did some, I was kind of goofing off before, and I was running a little late because I was kind of putting some tweets on a tweet on and a Facebook about the thing, hoping people see it, maybe join us. But we'll see. I don't think so. It's too early. It's too early for zombie time for most of you guys in the U.S. and it's here. Some people say, why don't you just do it like this? Whatever. Well, what to do? Well, just to say what's going on. I'm continuing the Aristotle. We're doing videos. Okay. At the end of the month, I still have my American course. I'm finishing. We're in the 8th week. So 2 more weeks of regular discussion in international law. And then we have the 11th week is the final paper. So by the end of February, they'll have their papers. And haven't been told, Norwich hasn't told me whether they're going to have me teach in the March. I hope they have me teaching in March because I need the money, honestly. This next week, my Polish students submit their essays, so that's what I'll be doing. So I get work. I wrap up. I should this weekend create the new Moodle classes for my next term, for my 4 classes. Actually, 2 of the classes will automatically, so 5 classes next semester. And one of the master seminars. I should kind of reach out to my BA students, and my MA students. We'll see what happens. I'm kind of a little nervous about this. I really don't like being nervous about things. Okay, that's how it goes. So I'll get everything done by the end of this week. We have a week break. My wife wants to go to see her mother, and I probably will go with her. So therefore, I have to get a lot of recordings done this week. So not this coming week, but the week after that, my wife wants to go to her mother's. And if we come back, we'll probably come back on a Friday. So that means I'll probably miss the live stream, So we'll see how it goes. So I hope not, but we'll see. This is things like this. What else? There's not much. I should be writing, but I haven't. I've been kind of like really screwed up. I've been doing paperwork with the university and dealing with a lot of shit, and therefore it's kind of been. I've been dealing with student issues and things like this, technical things about thesis supervision. So it's like, I've been reading a lot. I normally read a lot, but okay, that's it. Let's go on to the topics. Videos. Okay, I'm doing the Aristotle. I said that we're still using that we're hitting book 3 of the ethics, which deals with the virtues, the more detailed account of the virtues. We're in the beginning of the shooting of that, so therefore right now online, it's for finishing up book 2, what's being released this week. And I'm doing it 5 days a week, and including, therefore, there's going to be 2 videos. There's going to be, on a Friday, usually there'll be 2 videos. I had some videos on a Saturday, but I think I'm going to stop that because I think I think having the 5-day drop is probably the best. And my Saturday really is booked with my participation in the discussion group that I belong with, which I don't want to like have a competing video with that because that's good. And I have technical issues with that because the university got it has now did some stupid things with. The university did some stuff, and therefore now, because of that, I have to go decide what I'm going to do with the files. I am about 20 gigs near my limit, 30 gigs near my limit. So therefore, probably 2 months more of videos will cause a problem. So, and the university keeps us at 200 gigs for Google, which is up, which I for my own personal, for this site, I had to go up to, I had to buy, I spent like basically some money a month, which to get me the 2 terabytes. So it's like, okay, it's better, it's safer. I don't have to delete stuff. It's okay. So the editing things and things like that, and I can have a relatively decent size. But I have to basically go purge a lot of stuff and the other things. I'm kind of worried about that. They say I can have another, and they won't allow increase the size. They won't allow it to increase the size for some reason. But if I apply, they can give me another G drive, an additional one that's linked, and that's a pain in the ass. Well, okay, people are leaving. I understand, because it's boring right now just to text stuff about writing and things like this. I had no set topics. People had some questions before. One of the things that I looked at this week, something that came out last week, was at American Mind. Paul Gottfried wrote a piece about race realities, race fantasies on the right, which I think was a very good piece in that sense. He was kind of criticizing I kind of like Vic Hansen, but Vic Hansen on the race question is very much a liberal in that sense. He is much more, his mother was a liberal. He comes from a liberal tradition. His mother was a California liberal. The Californians were much more, the Central Valley Californians were probably more open on the question of race, because the Californians often, particularly the Swedish, and again, remember, people like Hansen come from the Swedish background, background, which therefore they come from places like Minnesota and Wisconsin, Minnesota, which really didn't have many African Americans until the post 1930s, 40s, with following the Great Migration from the South upwards in the 30s and 40s and 50s and later 60s. And therefore, they didn't really have long traditions of integrating with the African Americans. So they had more liberal ideas about it. They really believed the integrationist ideas that the liberals advanced in the 19th century, who understood the melting pot in a certain way. The melting pot was a cultural argument, not a racial argument. That's a whole, where does the melt, in American studies, this was a big question always. Where does the idea of the melting pot comes from? American idea of the melting pot, where does it come from? And, some people would point to Crevecoeur's famous idea of the American as some people point to the account of Crevecoeur in his letter to the American farmer, where he kind of portrays the American as a new construction of amalgamation of different, different cultural, the Englishman, the Frenchman, the Span, and then also the question. Now, Crevecoeur's essay is very interesting because he does go to Charlestown at the end of the day. And Charlestown is, I think the Charlestown he's referring to is in South Carolina, where he addresses slavery and has a very dark view, and he has a very negative view of, there's a trip to, not Martha's Vineyard, Martha's Vineyard, or where is it? It's a place where there was basically the island still to this very day. It was a city made by whaling, and he talks about the grossness of commerce and trade. A Quebecois is a very famous text. It's basically a kind of an agrarian pastoral care about the creation of this. This is pre-America. This is at the time of the colonists. And he's explaining a kind of the longing for America in terms of agrarian perceptions. And then he has two alternatives at the very end. One is the examination of I think it is Martha's Vineyard, or the island that is basically right off Massachusetts. That is very off the coast of Massachusetts. That really hit its stride and its massive population before it became kind of, by now today in the later 21st century, the end of the 21st century, it became a kind of gentrified elites, a place of the elites, right? But in the 18th, much of the end of the 17th and 18th and even early 19th century, it was rather the hustle bustle of an industry, the whaling industry, which was a very important industry. So therefore, it was tied to the hunting of whales and the commerce of whales. And we have to understand that the whale industry was about whale oil. And whale oil was a cheap alternative to canned wax, and therefore allowed for the cheap lighting of nighttime. People, you have to understand today with electricity, we're spoiled. Imagine a world, the world before the creation of gas. Before electricity, there was gas lighting, but before gas lighting, and gas lighting is late 18 in major cities. So it's going to be very difficult to have gas lighting in little villages and houses in the woods and things like this, little towns. It's only going to be available. Gas lightings of the 1850s, 60s, 70s. And then the only turn of the century do you move from gas lighting to electrolyting. But the world before that was very dark. We have to understand that the world, when the places got dark and root got dark, you had darkness. Okay, we have to understand that the world really fundamentally changed. Gas lighting, electricity lighting. The world, if you're going to have lighting in the house, you have candles. Okay, wax. Or you burn wood, and maybe have wood, but then wax candles. But candles and burning, having a kind of wax lighter or a torch was not cheap. It was expensive. Okay, particularly candle-based things. Candle-based things were very expensive. Wax candles and having this was a very expensive. Only the very wealthy could afford to light the house with candles. It was only with the consumption of whale oil do you have it very relatively inexpensive, but still more expensive than it's ill. In other words, gas systems are going to be a much cheaper alternative to whale oil. Okay, that's why it does. The problem with it is, how do you get gas? How do you have gas get delivered? It's a very complicated structure. It can only happen in large urban areas. It cannot happen in rural areas. It's when electricity emerges. But first, in fact, that's the whole fight of that movie, that the Current Wars, which is the fight between Westinghouse versus Edison, and the Edison system, which was localized and local, AC versus DC, alternating current, the two currents, right? And Westinghouse's distributive system. Okay, Edison wanted to have everything localized, general, a much more, what do you call? It was localized and there's arguments for both Westinghouse versus that. Westinghouse was a distributor. It could generate more, but it would have to you could distribute it greatly. And what Edison wanted was something different. So that you have to understand how people like to make Edison the bad guy, and Tesla, Tesla was, which was, Big Bang was saying Tesla versus Edison. Well, no, it's more complicated than that. Tesla, if it wasn't for Westinghouse, Tesla's ideas would have gone nowhere. Okay. This is the interesting thing about that. But let's go back to the question of Crevecoeur, in that sense. Crevecoeur's position about this was that in his account of looking at the whaling houses, how dark and bad, and this is almost monstrous, right? That it is like, oh, this wealth is produced by this, and it's inhuman, and all of a sudden there's going to be all these people living in the island, and it's big and it's crowded and it's horrible. And I think many ways we have to look at that and then look at, and this is before he's writing this before the revolution. Okay, he's writing this prior to the American Revolution, and his account here is pointing to. And also it's before the Industrial Revolution as well, the American Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, which changed the big American cities to a very much a criticism of it. So it's very interesting in that sense. But again, why is that the account? He ends on the other account of as Carolina, Charlestown, and slavery, right? And why did I talk about this? Well, because I think this is the problem. I think we have to understand this debate within conservatism today. Modern conservatism, there is kind of a wanting to forget the question of race, because we have to understand a lot of today's conservatives were liberals. That's we can even say or the neocons. Well, the neocons are just one wing of this. When I look at someone like, I don't look at someone like, what's his name? Even Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a more problematic character in that sense. But look at someone, Ben Shapiro's of the world, or even the Rubins. Okay, Rubin, the homosexual activist from Young Turks who becomes man of the right. Right? Is this conservatism? No. This is basically what. And in a way, conservatism evolves. What we understand conservatism to be in the mainstream is something that kind of does evolve. This is why my mentor, Mel Bradford, my old good teacher, Mel Bradford, and before he died, a couple of years before he died, in the introduction to one of a series of his essays, the book was called The Reactionary Imperative, where he kind of argued that, he's come to kind of, not be repulsed from the term reactionary. Because at the time he's writing this, in early 1990s, late 1980s, and this is before, my God, things have gotten worse. His point was the term of reaction is a necessary one. Why today? He's writing in the late 80s, early 90s. In our current climate, this is a necessary concept reaction. Why? Because conservatism means little. What is there to conserve? Conservatism tends to mean traditionally to conserve or to preserve. So what are we left to preserve but the outrageous? Today, gay marriage and women's right, radical ideas of women's rights and racial equality. These are the things that people are trying to preserve, right? And therefore, this is, abortion is something, you hear some people out there among the certain elements among the conservatives and even the Democrats who argue, oh my God, the court overturning of Roe versus Wade and Dobbs is a radical decision. It's revolutionary or reactionary because and that a conservative would preserve Roe versus Wade, right? Okay, this is the problem. Conservatism just means conserve. And what happens if what exists now is no longer decent or good, or it is the outrageous or the ridiculous? And I want to look at the American Mind piece by this about by Race Fantasies by Paul Gottfried, January 25th, American Mind. Gottfried, who is a very interesting man of the old right. But again, he comes also, he was shaped by the people like Adorno. Okay, Marcuse. He got his dissertation supervised by Marcuse and Adorno. I think Marcuse. I think it was. He has a book about people he's influenced. He knew Nixon after post. He knew Nixon after Nixon's loss, and Nixon was living in New York in the late 1970s and early 80s, and Gottfried was hanging out with the New York area. He only had a job at a New Jersey university, not a big, even though he was a Guggenheim fellow. He's a brilliant fellow, Gottfried. He won the Guggenheim very young, and I think something like that, a big award. He studied Greek, classical Greek, and also German philosophy. He very much knew German thinking. His interest in classical Greek was through the German philologist tradition. His first real book was about German historicism and the question of German history. He really knows the German thinking. He's written many, many books. I know this. He became a major critic of the neoconservatives and what we call conservative Inc. today, of the late 90s during the Bradford. How neoconservatives and things went after my mentor Bradford when Nick Reagan in the early, like 85, 86, tried appointing to the National Endowment for Humanities chair. And this is when some neoconservatives, and I think also one of Jaffa's students, went out and backstabbed, started to really collaborate with neoconservatives and liberals to prevent the Bradford thing. This is the big fight. This is the big fight between the so-called, what will become the paleocon conservative fight. Now, Mel never took this personally. But people like Gottfried and some of Mel's other friends took it more personally than Mel did. And this became, and with Gottfried, it became a very visceral fight with him for 30 years, almost 20, 30 years. You can see his attack on liberal. He has this whole series of books, but most of them not only about the neoconservatives, but the liberals and the radicals, and he's written many, many books. In his recent books, he wrote about fascism, but also Antifa. And he was for a long time, for like 20 years, the editor. He replaced Fleming as the editor at Chronicles. Now he's retiring. He has editor at Chronicles, and I think they're letting someone I know, Julie Ponzi, now be the editor at Chronicles. And I think that's weird. This has been the Jaffa'ite, the Claremont Institute, Jaffaites, and the kind of paleoconservatives that led by Gottfried and gang were kind of all during the 80s and 90s and maybe even early thousands at war. I think it was over Trump that they kind of made peace. In fact, I think the peace was mitigated by Anton's, Michael Anton and some of his positions kind of mediated, even though they continued disagreeing. Anton and many people are following the Trump side of the Claremont Institute, the pro-Trump wing of the Claremont Institute, made peace with Gottfried. Gottfried made peace with them to a great degree, to the point where it was never, 10 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, it was unthinkable Chronicles would ever publish something by a Jaffa person, or even think about hiring a Jaffa trained person to be even on the board. Whereas Julie Ponzi is Jaffa's school, Claremont Institute style, but also went through the Ashbrook Center, in Ohio, are very much tied very much to the people who were Ashbrook at the time. It was very much a kind of leaning towards Jaffa's view of this question of America, right? The Declaration, pro-Lincoln Declaration is the heart and soul of the American Revolution, versus Jaffa is that the Declaration is not that significant or less important, and that the equality is not the main thing. In fact, that's that whole debate, right? That whole Jaffa versus Kendall Bradford debate that really defined, separated and animated much of the late 70s, early 80s, the 80s and 90s, right? The divide between this. And the idea that a Claremont Institute document would be posted. Again, this amelioration and this ceasefire, friendly cooperation between these two schools is something that I think Michael Anton played a very important role shaping. And therefore, to have, and you have to remember, to have American Mind allow Paul Gottfried to kind of pee on the Jaffaite assertion that equality of race is the heart of the equality clause, right? It's the Abraham Lincoln fallacy, and therefore that's a very interesting, very interesting article on this side. Though he's not technically, what's interesting, he's not really going after Jaffa and the Claremonters. He's kind of just criticizing Victor Davis Hanson, which like I said earlier, I don't disagree with Hanson that much. I think Hanson is interesting. But this piece is a very interesting, Gottfried's piece is a very suggesting that the question is that Gottfried really wants to throw some questions into the question. Is the question of racial harmony possible? And was the racial harmony really likely? Now, this goes to something back I wrote 22 for American Greatness about the question of forgiveness. That I got the Bulwark went after. I mean, the Bulwark and their hack job people went after. They went back and said, "Oh, I was a neo," because I was very in my 1990s. I was kind of rebelling against a lot of the Straussian stuff, particularly Jaffite stuff, simply because I was, Mel just died, and I was kind of like. Because I was a Mel student and I agreed mostly with Mel, even though I was not a Southerner, nor I could understand the Southern position. I had a very the race question. I had a very nuanced position on it. I didn't necessarily believe in what this idea that blacks were. I mean, I was trained in social biology and science. Mel used to criticize me. Bradford used to criticize me because I was. Mel himself didn't like scientific analysis of race. He was very critical of what he called scientific racism, and he thought that social biology merged on scientific racism, which is I came to respect Mel's position on this only because of the science, okay, not of racism, but of the idea of racial differences, and that racial differences were a reality of human beings. And that some people, and that it was going to be very difficult, and the question of of how communities and societies operate, and the degree of homogeneity and heterogeneity that can be tolerated in a successful community, and the ways you have to, the mechanisms you need to allow had very diverse community to ultimately cooperate with each other. And as there's high racial or differences of stock, it's going to be very difficult for a society who didn't share the same values and share the same much in something other than and didn't look at each other or saw the colored motto as something that divided them. Okay, but that's going to be difficult. Okay, particularly post. This is why Tocqueville's book 10, chapter 10. Volume 1, Part 2, Chapter 10 of Democracy, the end of Volume 1 of Democracy in America, that long chapter is a very dark and very difficult thing, because it doesn't, Tocqueville ends Democracy in America on a very dark note in that sense, because he doubts it. In fact, I would even, if I was Gottfried, I would highlight Tocqueville on that. That this is not a positive note in that sense. We have lost people, so oh my God, I think people walked away from that thing. So it's not a question of race realism and art realism. I thought it was a very interesting piece. I thought it was very useful of Gottfried to focus on Hansen, who I think Hansen is a perfect example of someone who was. I've always respected Victor Hansen's work. If I look at his work on classicism, in fact, if you look at his career, he spent his time mostly educating. In fact, where he was, it was a very mixed environment between Mexicans and the Swedes. Okay, this is like the same thing in a place like Boston between the Irish and the Puerto Ricans, of the interconnection of this, of the old Irish as they left out, the Italians, the Irish-Italian fight that then, as the blacks came in, the Black-Irish fight that was always there. There was always a Black-Irish conflict in the Northeast. The blacks and the Irish were kind of very much at each other's throats. You can see that in the movie. They didn't really talk about it that much in the Gangs of New York. If they really looked at the Gangs of New York, you'd have to make it a black and white issue more than it was. And the fact that the draft riots in New York targeted the blacks. The Irish targeted the blacks and lynched and killed Africans in the race riots. And the crisis of busing in the 70s. The federal government forcing busing in the 70s in Boston. The riots because of busing riots were much more violent and visceral than anything that occurred in the South. That's always one of the dark secrets of that. Racism was more implicit and more visceral in the North than in the South, in that sense, because of the Irish. The Irish looked at the blacks, in many ways, if you look at the history of the immigration, the Irish and the blacks were competing on the same level. And this is something that Thomas Sowell talks about. That you see racism and things like anti-Semitism and racism. A lot of it is about the certain low entity groups competing economically, trying to see each other. That there was the dominant economic classes often will play the two groups against each other as a way to preserve their position. And that happened in the Northeast. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestants played the blacks against and actually sided with the blacks against the Catholic Irish in that sense, and the Italians in that sense. And then what happened was when the Irish finally outnumbered the Irish and the ethnic community, the Catholic ethnics eventually outnumbered the WASPs. They turned viciously against the blacks, and then they made and then when the division of the Democratic Party started to emerge, as all of a sudden as starting in the 1960s, as Catholics became more middle class and no longer supported the democratic machine as much, and their voting behavior kind of became more diverse, right? Then they needed to bring the Democratic Party saw now the opportunity, using civil rights and welfare as a mechanism to basically ensnare the African American population as a democratic voting bloc. And therefore, as the migrants, and as the Irish and the Italian Catholic migrants became more economically stable and to enter the middle class, they became more professional, and no longer working class, lower working class. They moved increasingly into the Republican sphere. And that changed the way politics happened, and particularly that. And by them entering the economic middle sphere, what it was, the dominant elite embraced more liberal. Now, the elite was always more liberal than the society. You have to always remember that. The elite was always more liberal than the societies, particularly the economic elites were always more liberal. Because, you have to understand, if you're going to make business, making money, making business, being, racism or prejudice is a cost on economic utility. In other words, you want cheap labor, so it doesn't matter. This is the thing about capitalism and a market model. The market model, any kind of prejudice or trying to limit this, if I say women can't work, gays can't work. Blacks, we're not going to allow hire blacks. What does this do? This reduces the labor pool. And by reducing the labor pool in this way, you raise the cost of labor. Does a manufacturer want that? That's a cost. You're increasing the costs. So what does a manufacturer want to do? He wants to reduce the cost of labor. So how do you reduce the cost of labor? You reduce the cost of labor by not discriminating, by hiring blacks, bringing in immigrants, hiring minorities, allowing women to work. Women working is double your labor pool. It's reducing by doubling your labor pool. What do you do to the cost? You reduce all this nonsense you hear from feminists that they're against capitalism. That's silly. That is silly. The best ally feminism had was corporate capitalism, the capitalist class. Why? Because cutting costs in half, it made them. In other words, women workers, women entering the workforce, breaking up the unions, destroying unions. If you look at the history of unionization, was the. I got a question about Texas. Well, Texas, again, I think this is a big. What's happening in Texas is another question. I'll get to that soon. But the elites, in that sense, were always much more liberal and much more tied to. This actually does come into the question what's happened in Texas. Immigration. Look at the so-called 1%. There was a very good survey done of elite opinion. The elites always liked open borders. Why? Cheap labor. It was why did Angela Merkel, a Christian Democrat leader, push for open borders? Not because she's a socialist or utopian, but because the business sectors who are the big industrial German corporations needed cheaper labor, needed workforces. And if you're going to remember the German coalition between the big industry, there's this, Germany has always been a kind of a corporatist structure between trade union bosses and the big mercantile, the business interest and the state interest. In other words, this three-partite model of cooperation. No, they say electoral base. That's it's more complicated. Let me just explain why the Germans did it. The Germans didn't do it because Merkel will think that, oh my God, bringing all these new migrants are going to make more CDU voters. The socialists thought that. Social Democrats think that. Okay, yeah. So therefore, then was Merkel a stupid fool? No, it's the left. Okay. The left will betray the trade unions because they think that as the trade unions are shrinking, industry is shrinking, and trade unions vote will shrink, and that means the left will die. So the left had to shift to a new voting bloc. Okay, so they starting in the 60s, the European left turned to migration as a mechanism to grow, but you needed to have the right agree with this, particularly the corporate right, because if the corporate right did not agree with this and agreed with in other words, you'd have an alliance between the right and the populist against the Social Democrats, which would block that. So you needed to have an argument for why would the corporate elite want you to do that? And the argument was cheap labor. And how do you get the trade unions to go onto it? Well, you scare the trade unions saying that if you don't allow migration in, all the big businesses will move the jobs out of Germany. Now, this is a double fault. The conservative parties, even though they want to protect their ethnic voting base, fears the loss of the revenue that the German or big corporations would produce for tax. That all of a sudden, if all those companies were starting to move their businesses offshore, this is a threat to them. Now, it's happening anyways because of green politics. It's more complicated in Europe because the green parties pushing a green agenda with a shrinking population have agreed that what's going to happen is we don't really want, this is the problem. Do you really want all these migration? Okay, you're going to have to bring these people to do the work that Germans won't do and Europeans won't do. So you have migration to keep costs of labor down and prevent them from people, in other words, you do this. It's a very complicated model. The American model is more problem. I mean, the American model, there is a consensus between the big corporate elites and the Democratic have always funded the thing. The Texas story is a problem. Right? The border is, I'm sorry, the Clinton era, the Democratic Party has basically come to the view that open borders and migration only benefits a Democrat. I think this is a mistake. I think Sam Huntington, of who we are, at one level feared this, and this is the argument. He looked at the Democrats doing, he said, "Oh my God, they're going to cause problems. That's going to break." But if you look at the question of migration and the Hispanic voter and the rise of the Hispanic vote populations. The Hispanics are very more socially economically, they're very liberal. I mean, they're communal, they're more pro welfare program, more pro state intervention in terms of social work and funding of things. So therefore, they're kind of more pro what we would call economically social left. But on social issues, they're far more conservative, socially conservative. And this is a danger for the Democratic vote because the Democratic vote in the elites are mostly social leftists. So therefore, this is why the cultural war is such a big thing, because this is the famous argument, starting in the 1990s and early 2000s. What's wrong with Kansas? What's wrong with Kansas argument? Kansas should that the left argued all of a sudden all these people, they're using culture to get the populace to forget about the difference between the right and the left having economic issues. They're using culture as a way of distracting the populist voting working class to vote against their economic interests. The problem here is that for the danger of that argument is that, the populist working classes don't agree all on race. Therefore, this idea that there's all, in other words, Marxist, it's a Marxist delusion that the workers of the world share a common interest. They don't. Why? Because racial differences matter. They will matter. And group identity does matter in a certain degree. And that globalism benefits workers, ironically, but workers of the developing world, okay, at the expense of the workers of the developed world. Okay. Now, the developed world, what happens as there's a problem. As populations become stabilized and doing it, the birth rate among the lower of the more prosperous classes decline. So as industrialization and the structure of creating a lower middle class, stable lower working class, led to not increasing birth rates among them, but declining birth rates. And this creates a problem for commerce. And that's it. Now, of course, this is what the working class wants. They want more. They don't want cheap labor. Okay, so they didn't have to have cheap labor by all of a sudden you have a working wages and things like this. You don't necessarily have to have the same produce the same levels of cheap labor to do this. You can have smaller families because the smaller families are going to be more because of the working wages and the better conditions and the better health care. You don't need as many children. So therefore, what ends up happening is population, the working classes shrink. Now, for the capitalist, what happens is, oh my God, we need more workers. We need workers. So you need to bring in migration. Now, this only works, stability, if you only bring enough migration that doesn't destabilize the system. Another way you can do it is outsource now starting in the 1990s, you started to outsource the things because in particular the European model was outsourcing. But the problem with outsourcing was if you outsource too much, as you started to outsource too much, there was a problem of what to do with your working class. And the 1980s, in the 60s and 70s, the growing social welfare state increased. But by the 1980s and 90s, the economic reality of the social welfare system in Europe started breaking down. Go look at England. England is a perfect example of this. Thatcher was necessary. Thatcher's reforms were necessary because if something wasn't done to change the trajectory of the working welfare system and the welfare class situation, England would have collapsed. Now, what happened was Thatcher was successful, but then what happened was Blair came along and found a way to weaponize Thatcher's economic policy to advance leftist causes, okay, to advance social democratic positions, and to increase this and use weaponized migration as a mechanism to get what we call the capitalist class or the professional class to support labor. Okay, so therefore this is the way, and you see the same thing what's happening in the Republican Party in America. The traditional Republicans of the 1940s, 50s, and even 80s, the professional class, starting in the 1990s, became more the Democratic. Before Clinton, it was very unlikely that you would see the professional middle class being attractive to the Democrats. It was only when there was an issue at stake, and what was the traditional constituency of the Democrat was the working classes, ethnic minorities, women, and other minorities. The minority, this kind of broad coalition, right? With particularly, and that the farmers were kind of a both-way switch. The farmers could be as much. The farmers on one issue would be with the Democrats, but then on another issue they would be with the Republicans. So the white farm base would switch. The white working class was mostly the white urban middle class was mostly Democratic, but the rural farming class would shift. The white farming class would shift. The majority white farming class, the minority Mexican and black day laborer on the agrarian thing was a Democratic voter for the most part, right? Mostly, if they now in the South during Jim Crow, they did not vote, and the same policy was aimed at the Mexicans and the illegals. The idea was that this day laboring class would be a progressive vote, would be a Democratic captured vote if they voted. In fact, that's the so-called problem with the non-likely voter. The tradition of non-likely voter often favored Democrats, okay, up until 2002, 2005. Today, the non-likely voter is more likely to vote for Trump than Biden. Okay, this is the interesting thing. That if you go to unlikely voter, the unlikely voter models will be more pro-Trump than pro-Biden. This is a weird thing. Also, the Democrats have been scared by illegal migration. Why? Because illegal migration in the cities, as the Abbott and other Republicans started first with DeSantis's trick idea, but then Abbott went full circle by shipping them to all the cities. DeSantis only shipped them to Martha's Vineyard as kind of a symbolic gesture of doing this, kind of a symbolic attack. You attack Disney, in other words, DeSantis did this as a show tactic, kind of I call it, and that's why I never was pro DeSantis. I think DeSantis is more kind of like the old right, the conservative ink right, which did symbolic gestures to the populist right just to kind of get the vote for me. And then when they get in power, they backstab them and betray them, as like Nikki Haley. Look at Nikki Haley's background. She was the Tea Party darling, but once she got in power, she betrayed the Tea Party. Look at Marco Rubio. Much of the so-called Tea Party candidates who remained and got successful often were sold out to the corporate interests and betrayed the Tea Party positions. And those who didn't were destroyed by the corporate interest. Most of the less intelligent, the real, authentic ones. DeSantis is a typical state level politician. Well, he is. No, I'm sorry, he is. DeSantis is very much a kind of a self-serving, the kind of personality. I mean, in many ways, look at his personality. He doesn't. DeSantis is smart. He's a lawyer. He has, he's not if you look at him, he has characteristics. He's intelligent. He has opportunity. He knows how to think. But he doesn't have any retail politics skills. By retail politics, I mean going out to the people. He looks very uncomfortable with the people. Okay, he doesn't have he's not charismatic. He doesn't have a natural charisma. He can kind of fake it to a degree when he does. He knows how to play the drum and drum up support, and therefore knows how to. He's smart enough to manipulate gestures to get the right to support, particularly the nationalist right. Hi there, Peter, California. Good morning to you. DeSantis is smart enough to know how to do that, but doesn't have the authenticity to deal with these issues. And if you look too closely to DeSantis, even the Disney thing was more show than actual support. And even the Martha's Vineyard stick, he did in fact, the way he did it, he opened himself to trouble because ironically, the Biden Justice Department were looking at are still currently looking at charging him with criminal charges on what he did. Now, what Greg Abbott did and the Texas system did, well, by shipping every major city, all the big cities, dumping them there, moving them out of Texas into those big cities, particularly Democratic cities. This is brilliant. This is the difference. Well, no, Vivek, listen to this. Vivek is I don't think he's a con. I just think he is kind of he's someone who sees an opportunity, political opportunity. He is a businessman. He's ambitious. He has ambition because what he is, he's Indian. He's Indian of a certain class. He's a con. I don't think he's a con completely. I think he is playing people to a degree. I don't know what he believes, but again, Trump's, you can make the same. People made the same attack on Trump in that sense. I think Trump is more authentic simply because we know him longer, and he always had a kind of a pro-working class kind of vibe to him. When the question is what is Vivek is really about? Vivek rhetorically is a better defender of what Trump is doing than Trump is. I don't think Vivek will be a leader, but Vivek will be a very useful ally, more useful than DeSantis in selling Trump's vision and articulating Trump's vision. DeSantis is not a good articulator. Vivek is and therefore this is what's interesting. As Trump's genius was marketing, okay, and he understood how the way he branded and marketed the movement. Now the problem is not the branding and marketing of it, but the articulation of it. And I think this is I don't think he would be Who, DeSantis or Vivek? Neither of them are going to be good for the VP. Vivek is no way near. Vivek needs to experience. He needs to do something. He needs to accomplish something on the political level. Trump didn't do that. Then why are you making? But no, Vivek would need to. I think Vivek should run for governor of California. Fix California. If he could run for governor of California and fix California, then and only then would I say, okay, he's no longer a con. Deliver. Okay. In other words, he needs to show he could win California, I think. As to be honest with you, Elders almost, if it wasn't for the dirty shenanigans of what happened in the voting registration issues and some of the manipulation, Elders almost won the California recall. Remember that. That was he lost it by big numbers, but that was by the democratic manipulation of the vote. And I think Vivek in California would be a very important thing. Could win where Elders couldn't. Elders' problem was mostly, he was in it for the money, the grift. He makes his money. People like him is really the, this is why I don't really like someone like, what's her name, that blonde woman, conservative, who was pro-Trump, then anti-Trump, Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter, she makes her money by creating controversy. And then when she decided to when she turned against Trump, she did so because that she saw more money making that way than doing this way. There is the grift on the right. This is why I kind of like someone like Rick Barris. Rick Barris is right about this in many ways. The grifters on the right are just as much, look at the guy. What is his name? This is the big problem with people like Ben Shapiro, but also with what is the guy who did the Veritas, who helped shape Veritas? He's a grifter. He's a vain, egocentric grifter who's more about me, and there's huge scandals about how he handled Veritas. And I agree with how he did it. It was just that what he did with Veritas regarding how genius, but then his own lack of character ultimately took control over things, and it demolished the benefit of it. Okay, this is what's wrong with that. And it's the same thing with Nikki Haley. Oh my God, it's their lack of character. And I think this is the problem with even the question with someone like Vivek. We don't know his character really yet. We need to see his. We know Trump's character. We know Trump's character. He's been here too long. We know all his flaws in that sense. Vivek, we don't really know. So we're risking it. So that's why I would think I would not. And this is my same problem with DeSantis. DeSantis, although was a good congressman, congressman, governor. I agree with Rich Barris that DeSantis was not the COVID hero he wants to portray himself as now. He came to the COVID, he was a latecomer to COVID criticism, but then he became the rabid COVID critic, claiming he was a COVID critic at the beginning when that was not true, and attacking Trump in ways. That's why Trump went after DeSanctimonious. I think Trump really was offended by being attacked by someone who really he helped make. And I think the same thing with Nikki Haley. He tolerated Haley and tolerated many conservative types, establishment types, hoping they would not betray, thinking they could cooperate, we can make a deal, we can work together, and then only to have them kind of attack him. But the Texas situation is, the border crisis is the border joke is the bill that they tried to the Senate was a joke. It was never serious. It was never going to be truly enforced. It was a win-win for the Democrats. The Democrats would hope to take the issue off the table, but at the same time not solve the problem. It was a win-win. And that when the Republicans did veto it, if they accepted it, the Republicans would be fucked, and if they didn't, they can be attacked. Okay, it's a typical Democratic ploy. I think the Republican governors need to start shipping, triple the shipping of the minority, the illegals, to places like Boston. Just hit every major Northeast city with 5,000 to 10,000 immigrant. Now 10,000 more migrants into New York, Philly, Newark, Hartford, Rhode Providence, Nashua, Buffalo, maybe Denver, Chicago, St. Louis. You keep on naming me Democrat, Wisconsin. You start dumping them in there, and the black vote will shift. You can see this right happening in all this. The black vote is angry. It's why are these immigrants getting better welfare programs than we are? Okay, this is you start a civil war with that on the Democrats. You get the blacks furious that they're being replaced as the big recipient of the social welfare Democratic tit. They will fight and resent that like anything. They don't ship them to Democratic places anyways. The Dems don't know, but the Republican governors can. I'm sorry. This is Abbott's success was dumping them in places, the Democratic cities. I know the Biden people aren't doing this. They're dumping into Republican places, but they're not even dumping a significant of this. No. We can see this in the polling. Jan, you can see this in the polling. It's really, you can see this in the black vote. You go do surveys in the African American cities in the North, and the attitude against migration is huge. This is why in places like Boston, you do national polls. What's the big issue? It's immigration. You think immigration is the big issue? Immigration is beating the economy. Why? Because the black vote, which is the most polling systems that the mainstream voting polling does, it overweighs a Democratic vote base. It oversamples big urban centers, and it oversamples African communities. Who's going to answer polls? The stay-at-home people like this. So the traditional voting surveys are going to get a higher proportion of not likely voters, but rather, general population, not the likely population. In fact, most of these opinion surveys looking at the Democratic polls were this is what freaked the liberals and the mainstream media out, was that their normal polling trick of going to the general audience, which would typically favor liberal policies and liberal positions, are now favoring Trumpist positions. That Trump captured the non-likely voter. That the non-likely voter is more likely to be a MAGA vote than a likely voter. The strong likely voter who is like this it's more even with them. And if you can keep voter turnout low, in fact, that's what happened in 2020. They attempted to keep to ensure that there was high mail turnout, which they could print up ballots, which they typically do. The big city urban machines do this. This is, go watch The Good Wife on CBS and the story about why did Felicia lose? How did Felicia's husband win in Democratic Chicago? The story, this is something that everyone. Go read every single American political science textbook prior to the 2020 election and look in the chapter about the urban political machine and how they do things. It's an open position that the urban machine generates votes. The idea that we've always knew that the Democrats can produce a 5%, in other words, you can get a 5% shift, 3 to 5. And you could do this. But if your voter turnout is so huge, there's not enough time to do the thing. So during COVID, you did have a 5 to 7% increase in mass ballotings. In fact, the problem of sending ballots to everyone the way they did in California and a lot of places led to the problems of ballot control. Really, problems of ballot. That's now the question is: could this be repeated again? The answer is no. You're not going to get. It's not going to. Even white lung happens, and there's another COVID-like crackdown in white lung in the next 2 months, 3 months. But it's too late. I'm sorry, it's too late. If there's going to be a COVID-like breakout, it's going to already start now. Like 2020, it happened right now. 2020, the beginning of the COVID breakdown, all of a sudden there was the rise of these lung and respiratory problem attacks. Started already. Now, if there's going to be the so-called white lung thing that's being rumored about, no, it would already have to be showing, and the numbers aren't showing. So I don't think there will be another 2020-like clamp down. I think that would be, you can get a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? Thing with the voters. I don't think there'll be another 2020. I think that what's happening here is a more complicated problem. I think the Democrats, I think the turnout, the turnout, very soon the Democrats can't. Biden, if you go look at how the traditional Republican model to ensure victory from during Bush and even hoping for McCain and that was the likely voter. That you wanted to have low turnout elections. You didn't want high turnout voters. You didn't want the non-likely voter to show up, because the non-likely voter was basically a Democratic +7, Democratic +10 shift. So therefore, that would throw Democrat, and that's the secret of Obama's reelection was high black turnout. The secret of Bush's victory in both 2000 and 2004 was low turnout in black communities. Obama's victory in 2008 was anger with what happened in the economy and a fight between the Democratic Party within the Democratic Party, the anti-Clinton versus the Clinton versus the liberal wing, and the liberal wing pushed Obama to punish the Clintons. Okay, but then what happened was the second. If you go look at the fighting in Chicago between the progressives and the machine, you would see that Obama was a progressive ally, but then sold out to the machine because the money. Okay, and that's how that was the whole presidency. And then the way Trump 2016 was the unlikely voter turnout. What really led Trump was unlikely. Now, the unlikely shifted very late. Trump was a closer election, much closer election. And this is why Barris is absolutely right. And I expect Barris is more things. How do you expect the primary situation Democratic? Well, the problem with the Democrats is that Biden's in trouble. There's a big problem. It is basically the situation of the anti-war vote in 1968 in the Democratic Party. And Biden purposefully screwed New Hampshire because he didn't win New Hampshire. He didn't win those early things. He won it was South Carolina that turned Biden, that gave Biden, and the fix in South Carolina was done to ensure that Biden would win and not Bernie, right? He won write-ins. Now, again, that he won in white when that was a joke. With such low turnout, you could the machine. All the establishment positions damn right ensured that they needed to put him in. Again, there's no electoral counts exactly, but it's a shame because he won only that. My God, even without that, I mean, if he couldn't get, given how low the turnout in New Hampshire was, he should have gotten 90%. I don't have a favorite strongman in history. I don't like strongmen. I think strongmen usually are bad fuck ups. But back to Jan's question, I think South Carolina, if he doesn't get 80%, if it's 70%, 60%, 70%, I think Phillips may get 30%, and I think some other people, if he gets only 70%, and I think that is the case, and if the black turnout is very low, and if enough white liberals decide they'd rather help fuck Trump rather than help Biden, they will vote for, they'll vote as Republicans and not show up, and that will actually maybe really backfire. In other words, that the guy who gave him his victory in South Carolina and why South Carolina is the first real Democratic primary is because he's desperate to kind of force not only high black turnout, but also, and there's not going to be high black turnout because Southern blacks are more pro-Trump than Northern blacks. So therefore, this is a big problem in this sense, right? You need to get the unlikely voter to, who's the guy? I mean, Philip. Oh, he's the guy who ran against, what's this, Dean Phillips? Dean, he's a Democratic congressman who wants to get run for Senate in Nebraska, and he did this as a publicity stunt. But he's basically the Eugene McCarthy of this election. RFK made a mistake. RFK should not have gone to the independent as quickly. He should have stayed in that and kind of been a write-in and a backdrifter in the Democratic Party and play the same role his pop did in '68. But he went independent. I think he went independent as a grift. I think RFK is more of a grifter than people think he is. And he's more of a Democratic asset. He, as a third-party person, he will hurt Trump in the northern, like the North industrial Northeast. He will be a drain on this. Now, the working class voter who would probably vote for Trump may now turn to RFK in those areas. But if you have West and no labels in there as well, that might mitigate it out. No. I'm sorry, he's not Nader. Nader actually was principled. Nader, I actually think Nader was more principled than RFK Jr. RFK is he sees that he fucked himself up with drugs and like all the Kennedys and now covering, and he sees the issue about that. He saw the COVID issue. He sees the popularity. He is his father's son. Look at what his father said at during the Cuban Missile Crisis and the way he behaved in the Cuban Missile Crisis and how he said one thing and then publicly said the other. The way he even backstabbed Johnson in the way like this, and the way he ran he was purposely plotting against Johnson, he would support positions. The Kennedys supported intervention in Vietnam, but then ran against it when they saw the popularity running it. Classic Kennedy's backstabbing. This is why this is how that works. What else? I think the problem is Biden is losing support. This is why all this talk now about all of a sudden this talk about Michelle Obama is never going to come in. I think the second Michelle Obama is even mentioned, the right has enough or her dissertation, her all the recordings of her Whitey this and Whitey that. She doesn't really. She's terrified. She says she's terrified of Trump. She didn't like Washington. I think the problem is this is, the liberals and the media talking about her is this. It's a liberal progressive masturbation fantasy. They're stuck with. Come on, look what happened to 68 when Johnson left. They were stuck with Humphrey. And the anti-war candidate, when the fact that after RFK was killed, and they were stuck. Well, that became the RFK. Oh my God, what happened if Bobby wasn't killed? If Bobby didn't get assassinated, man, we would have not been in Vietnam. Bullshit. We would have been in Vietnam, and it was Bobby and gang that made Vietnam in the first place. Come on, this is the. No, JFK had executed. No, I mean, I don't care about JFK. Was this JFK and Bobby were two of a kind. JFK was an opportunist. You have to remember why he was in Dallas at that time. He wanted a pot shot. He wanted, because remember what happened a couple of weeks earlier with Dean Acheson being attacked. He needed a right winger, a Ku Kluxer to take a pot shot at him, because this would help him solidify his support and kind of blackmail the South to support him against the. In other words, they just got. In fact, the famous line when they discovered that the person who shot him was this commie. That you should hear what Jacqueline said. Jackie O said, "He said, too bad Jack was killed by a fucking commie," because they wanted if Jack was going to get shot at, they wanted a right winger to shoot at him. So because it passed the Camelot narrative, that they wanted Kennedy. Kennedy probably wanted to get blown away in that sense. He provoked. He insisted on having the car. Having the Trump convertible. He wanted someone to take a pot shot at him because that was the best things. What do you think about shipping? You missed it. I think they should have sent a lot more. They should be packing up and deporting 20-30K of the immigrant. Every single one. They should just grab the Texas Rangers, should capture the migrant, put them on a bus or a thing, and dump them into not only New York, but every single Democratic city in the Northeast, in the Midwest. You show me a Democratic city and Democratic state, dump 30,000 a day, and this will create a civil war with the black vote. Dump them into not the white liberal communities, dump them in the black communities, and see how the blacks will turn against the Democrats. That is the secret. That is the secret about how to the Democrats in this for forever. Abbott is a better thinker, strategic thinker. I don't think Abbott is some hero of the right, but I think Abbott is a typical Republican establishment guy. He likes he like all the GOP. They kind of really like migration because migration helps them. But the danger is that the political backlash in its own state is. Okay, the question: do you think a similar crisis can happen in Poland? About what? The crisis in Poland is that the current government is a pro-German party that has, like the Germans, in bed with the Russians. Come on, PO was a very pro-Moscow party. It was going to sell Orlan to the Russians. It was like the Germans. Germans were kindly the Germans economically see themselves have strong economic interest in Russia, so they were they didn't want a Polish pipeline. They don't want a Polish pipeline in the Netherlands. They don't want a port in Gdansk, a new port, a major port or airport here that not only would compete with German ports, but actually reduce the traffic from Germany to through Poland. This idea, in other words, the idea that all these trucks go through Poland is a basic, huge problem in roads and things like this. That if all of a sudden there was a major port, if they actually finish up the port that they planned, the PIS planned, airport and a seaport, as that there, that's going to be a big thing, and that's what. I think that is why they're against it, because their German paymasters are doing this, and the coalition is so broad. It's hard. It has to work heavy-handed, because it's going to have to spend everything to keep everyone happy. And the only way you can do this is cut many of the programs of PIS, and it's going to eventually break down. You just have to just wait. It's going to be chaos. So I mean, it's different. They're not going to dump. The Germans are in crisis now. Look at what's happening in the West Europe. It's fucked. The farm riots. My God, the farm protesters and the and the backlash against a lot of neoliberal policy that's happening in Brussels, Berlin, German cities, France. All this, the media is not really talking about it that much because they don't want to. They're trying to, my God, they were able to defeat the yellow vests only because of COVID. This is much bigger and much more organized than the yellow vests. This is basically taking the trucker protests in Canada and tripling them. And this is all due to the green economic policies affecting the farmers and Ukraine war. The idea that Ukraine is going to have the Ukrainian agricultural sector will have access to the European market will fuck not only the Eastern European farmers, but also it will destroy. There'll be no justification at all for any farming in Western Europe. It will completely destroy the agrarian pact. So this is the idea that the argument is I'm pro. I think the Ukrainians should win the war. I don't necessarily think the Ukrainians should join the EU, but I think the Ukrainians should win the war. I think Zelensky will go. I think there'll be Khrushchev and other people who are going to, because Zelensky is so tied to a European Union bosses. He sold himself out to the Germans. He sold himself out to Biden. He betrayed the last Polish government to help the Germans and the Biden administration. No, the Ukrainians can win this war. I'm sorry, he's wrong. No, you're wrong. They are winning this war. The Russians don't have the ability and manpower to maintain this. Their attrition rations are ridiculous. I'm sorry. The Russians are on the verge, and that right now they lost control of their ability to interdict the Black Sea. So the Ukrainian wheat will flow by this spring. And they will not be able to interdict the Ukrainian wheat. Even if they get some strikes on that, they're not going to get enough, and there'll be enough Turkish interest. The Turkish middlemen are so invested. The Turkish shipping industry is so much in bed. It's going to be a Turkish-Ukrainian alliance economically that the Russians dare not fuck with, because the second they hit a Turkish ship in the sea, it will be a NATO war. No, they don't have to, Rich. They don't have to do this. You misunderstand the nature of warfare. That we have to. Oh my God! I'm sorry. Did the Viet Cong invade Washington? Did the Taliban invade Washington? Russia elite Putin is on the verge of collapse. he's destabilized everything domestically such that it's barely holding on to power there, only by this phony baloney myth about this is not causing. The second the impact of war start hitting, as long as the Western powers kind of remove the Ukrainians' restrictions of using longer range weapons against them, and start able to use some of the Western technology, the long-range weapon technology, to hit targets in Moscow. They're using their own crap to hit Moscow already in drones, and they're doing very well. I think Hodges is oversensed. I think the Russians were planning that, but I don't think they have the organizational capacity, and the Western allies are smart enough that they can strike them, even with a Biden in charge. I think you have to understand. Thank God NATO is written up as it is, that the commander-in-chief of NATO is independent of Biden, even though he's an American general. What is the title? It's I forget the European title. The chief of staff, the commander of European forces, NATO. You know, this Sackler is, though he's always an American officer, he is not under the command of the chief of staff or the president. He reports to the NATO chair. So therefore, he has autonomy to make decisions. And he can also, even any unit that's in NATO chain of command, he doesn't have to get the permission of the national commander to mobilize. That any unit is in the chain of command, Sackler can call and do this. No, I think I'm sorry. They do have capacity. I think I'm sorry. The Western Europeans have capacity. It's not. Their equipment is good. The Swedes and the Finns, they're fantastic. The Danes and Norwegians, they do have military capacity. The French has military capacity. The German does too, but the Germans really kind of downplay it because they don't want to do it, and they really fucked it up to some great degree. Over the past 20 years, they've really fucked it up to the capacity. In fact, to the point where Poland and the Eastern European countries have much more robust and healthier militaries. America just was paying the way, yes, during the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early thousands. And I think Trump changed that. Trump's 4 years in office forced European countries to actually start paying their way and redeveloping things in real capacities. The Russians really are the ones without capacities. It's a kind of the Russian military is a giant Kaprankin village of capacity because of they don't have a working workforce that is capable. It's a bunch of peasants who can't do anything, who don't know how to clean weapons, don't know how to clean. I mean, modern high-tech military needs maintenance and care. You show me the typical Rusky. He's an alcoholic buffoon who couldn't maintain things. I mean, they won World War II only because they had a population that could throw at the Germans, and that they had the Americans supplying them. This is not happening. The Allies are not supplying the Russians now. Germany is not sending the ball bearings to Moscow. Remember who was building Soviet equipment? It was because East Germany and German workers were producing this. No, not American intelligence. American intelligence was actually poor. It was American strategic planning. World War II, when it was won by America because of the American industrial might and the industrial capacity and logistics ability of the United States to basically supply the Allies and not necessarily manpower, but just resources that the Russians could fight a war because they were being fed and supported and supplied by the Americans. Without that, it was unlikely they would have won. In fact, that was if Hitler did not attack the United States in December 41, did not declare war, and Roosevelt only had to had to redirect all his Lend-Lease stuff to fight a Japanese war. World War. I mean, Russia would have collapsed. England could have preserved herself and withheld, but that was the Hitler's mistake. Hitler, by declaring war in the United States, slit his own throat. But Hitler, I don't want to get involved. Hitler had to take Ukraine and that area, not because that was because of the fucking SS and their stupid race theories. That the Himmler wanted to start breeding the new race, and that the idea of the true Aryan was to be developed in the Caucasus. That's where the pure Stone Age Aryans were. You had to fight Stalingrad to sure the Caucasus were still under Nazi control, so the SS breeding factories could recreate the perfect Aryan. So, no, I mean, it was their ideas that led to the Nazis lost the war because their war goals were shaped by their ideology. Hitler was ironically more rational than the rest of the Nazi elites in that sense. Hitler did not have the Stone Age Nazi view. That Hitler's view was kind of a Romanesque conception of the Aryan, which Himmler and the true hardcore Nazi scientists didn't buy. They looked at Hitler as kind of okay, he's a buffoon. He doesn't understand the mystic science of the things. Okay, but this is the real fundamental structure of what what I say about Ukraine. Ukraine is is a big problem for Europe in that sense, not because of independence, it's because if Ukraine gets market access to the European, this will cause a civil war. This will cause a civil war in Europe, and it will end the European Union. So I kind of wanted Europe. An EU victory. I want a Ukrainian victory because a Ukrainian victory means a marginalization of Russia, stabilization of Russia, a stabilization. I think the rise of a Turkish Eurasia, which is better than a Russian Eurasia, but an anti-Chinese would be an anti-China Eurasia. You might have to get rid of Erdogan, but I think Erdogan's children are going to succeed him, and they're going to be more pragmatic than he is. A Ukrainian Turkish alliance to kind of stabilize, keep Russia in check from being a destabilizer, and the breakup of EU. Instead, what you have is a Middle Europa where a broad Nordic Visegrad alliance through Poland with the Baltics, with the North, that plus the Visegrad, and maybe even to the Balkans, Romania, Bulgaria. This middle alliance based on economic interests against Germany and against Russia, and also against Ukraine. That will be the alliance. And what happens is there'll be the French-German collaboration. I think Germany might break up in that sense. I think breaking up in Germany is the best thing that can happen to Germany. But that's just me and my crazy, okay? I'm way breaking over this. What happened to Poland? I don't know. We're way over. I'm going to stop now. I was not planning on being here this long today. We're an hour and a half into the thing. And if you like the videos, like it, please. I got 2 videos already like this. Oh, it's not Hitler. What Hitler wanted, I disagree with this. I think that Hitler wanted a Germany-ruled universe. That was never going to happen. The geopolitical thinking of Hess and gang, of the Middle Europa, the Middle Europa that I vision is more of a Jagiellonian vision, that is anti-Germanic, anti-European. It is a land-sea coalition, a land-sea, where the typical German and typical Russian geopolitical thing is a land-constructed vision of geopolitics, which Medecker's theory, I think that's nonsense. I actually think the Medecker land-sea understanding is problematic, because the world island is not as, I hate to say it, the world island is, anti-Europe, but anti-Europe as this. I favored a European Union that was truly federalistic, but I don't think the French system can never accept federalism. The French statist structure, the logic of the centralized European statist structure, is incompatible with federalism. So that therefore you cannot do it. You get a confederacy, an economic confederacy, but the problem is the Euro elites want a much more integrated confederacy ruled by Germany. And that usually means look at what happened. Look what Schmidt says about the French Revolution, and you will see that the European Union will eventually have a centralizing strategy that will collapse itself. That's why there's going to be that sense. Well, that's it. I want to get involved in another 10 minutes. I can get another argument about that. So that's my stupid live stream for the day. Hope you guys had a good time. If you liked it, please like it. Hit the like button. There's only 2 of you left, and I understand the other people. If you're coming on this to check out of this, please do like it. Get people to subscribe. If you're not subscribe. Get others to subscribe. I'm not going to do my usual stick. You can follow me on social media, links below. My academic social media is below those. You can check me out as a scholar. You want to help me to do what I do with money ways, you can do so by, send me some money get me an Amazon gift card. You can find my university email via my academic social media. You can just buy an Amazon gift card and help me. That'd be a nice way to do it. I buy some books. I always need more money, book money, because books are expensive. Second way you can help is you want to help me financially. You can do so by subscribing on Patreon or Subscribestar. That's one way. It's a way that can help. Another way you can do so is, if you're not already bought one of my books, you can do that. But that, honestly, the publisher gets more money. But again, I would like to, if you buy a friend a book, buy yourself. If you haven't bought a book already, buy one of my other books. If you're going to buy my Lulu book, do it best by Lulu directly. So that way I'll get the bookstore's money. You can do the bookstores either by, online bookstores, Amazon and Barnes Noble, etc. Or if you favor your local bookstores, you want to support your local bookstores, ask your bookstore to order a copy. Okay, I will lose the money, but okay, you want to support those people. Take care. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Enjoy. Bye-bye, and see you soon. Bye-bye.